Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a story you might think you know. But trust me, there's way more to the Mayflower Pilgrims than those Thanksgiving myths.
Yeah, we're gonna uncover the real human story.
We're going to be using this great episode of the American History Hit podcast with historian Anna Scott to help guide us.
Yeah, and it all starts long before they even hit the Mayflower.
Okay, so before the ship, before Plymouth Rock, what's the starting point?
England, early 1600s.
Okay.
These folks, they were called separatists because they wanted to separate from the Church of England.
Right.
They wanted to practice their own version of Christianity, but England wasn't having it. Persecution, you name it.
So they were like, let's get out of here.
Exactly. They ended up in Leiden, Holland.
Wow, Holland. That's a pretty big move.
Huge. They sold off their possessions, everything to make this journey.
For religious freedom.
Right. They wanted to worship freely.
So, Holland, problem solved, right?
Well, not exactly. Life in Leiden wasn't perfect, you
Right.
know. They struggled financially. Jobs were hard to come by. Uh-huh.
And they worried about their kids, losing their English identity.
Makes sense.
So they started looking for someplace else, someplace where they could really build a community that aligned with their beliefs.
And that's where America comes into the picture.
America, the great unknown, full of possibilities. At least that's how they saw it.
So 1620 rolls around, and they decide to make the leap.
They set sail for the New World. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. They weren't alone on this journey.
Okay, who else is joining this adventure?
A group called Merchant Adventurers.
Merchant adventurers. Okay, so not exactly the same religious motivations as the Pilgrims.
No, not quite. These guys were entrepreneurs, businessmen, looking to strike it rich in this new land.
Oh, so you've got devout pilgrims seeking religious freedom and ambitious merchants chasing profits all packed together on this journey.
Exactly. A real mixed bag, a recipe for some serious tension. And remember, this is the 1600s. Crossing the Atlantic is no walk in the park.
So where do they set sail from? Southampton, England, 2 ships, the Mayflower and the Speedwell. But right off the bat, problems.
What happened?
The Speedwell, ironically, couldn't keep up. Sprung a leak, a bad one.
Oh, no.
They had to turn back multiple times. Can you imagine the frustration?
Delays, running out of supplies. I bet that was stressful.
Beyond stressful, some passengers had to sell the belongings, essential stuff like butter, just to afford the extra time in port.
Butter. Wow, that's desperate.
It shows how much they were willing to sacrifice for this dream.
So much riding on this voyage.
Everything. Their hopes, their fears, their entire future. They'd already left behind their homes, families, everything they knew.
And now they're stuck with a leaky ship.
It was a constant reminder of how fragile their hopes were.
So did they ever fix the Speedwell?
Nope. They had to abandon it in Plymouth, England, crammed everyone and everything onto the Mayflower.
Over 100 people crammed onto one ship.
It was already crowded to begin with. Can you imagine the conditions?
Not at all.
Think cargo ship, not luxury cruise liner.
Okay, I'm starting to understand the hardship here.
Families using blankets for walls, barely any privacy. And remember, this is a ship designed for cargo, not passengers.
Wow, talk about roughing it. And then, to top it off, they set sail in. When was it?
September, right smack in the middle of hurricane season.
Oh, no. So they're crammed onto this tiny ship, facing rough seas, storms.
66 days. That's how long it took to cross the Atlantic.
66 days. What were they eating all that time?
Hardtack. Basically a rock-hard biscuit. It was designed to last, but, not exactly a gourmet meal.
I can imagine. And to add to the already difficult situation, there's a birth on board during the journey.
Yeah, Elizabeth Hopkins gives birth to a baby boy. They named him Oceanus.
That's quite a story to tell. Born on the Mayflower in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean.
It speaks to the resilience of these people. We also can't forget about the crew.
Oh, right, the sailors. They weren't exactly pilgrims themselves, right?
Yeah. Not exactly. William Bradford, who later became the governor of Plymouth Colony, he wrote about one crew member. This guy mocked the Pilgrims' seasickness, said it was because of their weak faith.
Oh, wow.
Well, this crew member, he actually ended up dying during the voyage. And Bradford saw it as divine providence, like God was on their side.
That's a powerful belief to hold on to, especially during such a difficult
It
journey.
really was. It shaped their entire worldview.
So 66 days at sea, battling storms and, internal conflict, and they finally see land.
Land ho. But there's a twist. They arrived off Cape Cod in November, way north of where they were supposed to land.
Virginia.
Exactly, Virginia. So not only was the journey brutal, they ended up in the wrong spot.
So what did they do?
They searched for a suitable place to land. Took them over a month.
Wow, a month.
Finally, they chose an abandoned Native American settlement called Puxet.
Fucks it.
And here's a strange little tidbit. It was already marked as Plymouth on a map made by John Smith, the Pocahontas guy.
That is a weird coincidence. But this delay meant they were heading into winter.
A New England winter, no less. Supplies dwindling, tensions rising. They were outside the jurisdiction of their original charter.
Oh.
They needed a new plan, fast.
And that is where the Mayflower Compact comes in.
Exactly. A moment of crisis. A document born out of sheer necessity.
A document that would shape the future of America.
But as we'll see, it was far more than just a religious document.
They're in this new world, winter's coming, they need a plan B, and fast.
It was a real turning point. And,
Wow.
you'd think with all the stress and uncertainty, things might have fallen apart.
Yeah, you'd expect arguments and infighting.
But instead, they come together and create this incredible document, the Mayflower Compact.
And this was more than just like a set of religious rules.
Oh, absolutely. It was about survival, plain and simple. They realized they needed to cooperate no matter what their background or beliefs were.
So it was like a practical guide to living together in this new, challenging environment.
Yeah, you could say that. It established a civil body politic, this framework for decision-making, resolving disputes, working for the common good.
I mean, that's pretty revolutionary for the time, isn't it? This idea of people creating their own government, essentially.
It really was. They were way ahead of their time, and it laid the groundwork for so much of what America would become.
So from this tiny ship, this document emerges that helps shape the future of democracy. It's mind-blowing when you think about it.
It's a powerful story, and it's important to remember that both pilgrims and non-pilgrims signed the Mayflower Compact.
That's right, they all came together.
It shows a real commitment to building a society together, despite their differences.
So they land in Plymouth, make it through that first winter, establish a colony. But what happens to the Mayflower Compact? Does it have a lasting impact?
Well, that's where history gets, a bit messy. We have William Bradford's journal, an amazing first-hand account, but it was written years later.
Oh, so there's a chance some details got, romanticized a
Yeah.
bit over time.
Maybe a little bit. And then you have America, as a nation, starts to use the Pilgrim story to build its own identity.
Right. The Pilgrim story becomes the American story.
Exactly. And it gets, simplified. The focus becomes mostly on religion and the hardships, the complexity, all that gets pushed aside.
It's always easier to tell a simple, heroic tale than to deal with the messy reality, right?
It's human nature, I guess. And then in the 1800s, John Quincy Adams, future president, gives this big speech connecting the Mayflower Compact to the Declaration of Independence.
So now the Pilgrims are like the ultimate American heroes, right?
Pretty much symbols of freedom and self-governance. And then after the Civil War, Thanksgiving becomes a national holiday, and that really solidifies the Pilgrim story in American culture.
So the Thanksgiving feast, the story of Pilgrims and Native Americans, it all becomes this national myth.
A symbol of unity and gratitude.
But as we've seen, the real story is much more complicated, right?
Yeah.
There are all these different people with different motivations facing these insane challenges.
And they didn't always get along, that's for sure.
It's a story of resilience, faith, hardship, and, the power of community, even when things are tough.
Yeah, it's a reminder that history isn't always black and white. It's full of shades of gray, but that's what makes it so fascinating. And speaking of different perspectives, we always hear about the Pilgrim Fathers.
Right. But what about the women? What about the children? Their stories are part of this too.
Absolutely. They were there every step of the way, facing the same dangers, contributing to the survival of the colony.
It's easy to forget that whole families made this journey.
And many of the pilgrims were young, really young, when they left England.
Wow, teenagers making these life-altering decisions.
It challenges that traditional image of the stern old pilgrim. It shows how diverse their group really was. And it's important to remember that even though their faith was central to their lives, the Mayflower Compact, it wasn't just a religious document.
Right. It was about so much more than that.
It was groundbreaking, promoting cooperation and self-governance. And, these are values that still resonate today, especially in our world.
Where we face so many different challenges, so many different viewpoints.
Exactly. It's more important than ever to find ways to work together to find that common ground.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Mayflower story, what are some of the key things we can learn from their experience? I think the big takeaway for me is just how resilient the Mayflower Pilgrims were.
Oh, for sure. Imagine leaving everything, sailing across the ocean in those conditions, starting a new life in a completely unknown land.
It's pretty incredible what they accomplished.
And their story reminds us history, it's not always neat and tidy.
Right. It's not just dates and battles. It's real people.
People with hopes, dreams, and flaws, just like us.
Yeah. And the Mayflower Compact, it's like this symbol of their ability to, I don't know, adapt and overcome.
Yeah, to come together even when things are falling apart.
It makes you think, like, what could we achieve if we channeled a little bit of that Pilgrim spirit today?
Well, that's a great question. And honestly, I think that's what makes history so relevant to us today.
It's not just about the past. It's about understanding ourselves and the world around us.
We can learn so much from the choices they made, the challenges they faced, even their mistakes.
And the Mayflower Compact, it's like this testament
Mhm.
to their commitment to self-governance,
Yeah, creating their own rules, working together for the common good. I mean, that's still relevant today.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
especially in a world that's becoming, more and more divided. So before we go, I have one final question to leave our listeners with. How do you think the Mayflower Compact's emphasis on community and self-governance, how does that resonate with our times today?
That's a big one. Think about all the challenges we're facing, global issues, political divisions, you name it. The Pilgrims show us that even in the face of extreme hardship, people from different backgrounds can come together.
It's a reminder that cooperation, it's not just an ideal, it's a necessity.
And that self-governance, it takes work, commitment from everyone involved. If you're interested in learning more, be sure to check out the full American History Hit podcast episode.
It goes into even more detail about the Mayflower Pilgrims and, the legacy of the Mayflower Compact.
It's a great listen.
And we'll be back soon with another deep dive into history. Until then, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep learning from the past.
Thanks for joining us.